flatland like a man on the run, riding down Highway 61. Sides of the roads all lined with fields, nothing but sunset in the windshield. Feel it as soon as I ride into town. This is where I go to slow down. Miles and miles of soybeans and corn. I'm in the place where the blues was born. About a mile from the big muddy river, place I'll always remember. Cabin on the lake and a fishing pole. Forever here I'll rest my soul. I can feel my worries drift away from being out in the sun all day. No matter where in the world I go, I'll always find home on the banks of that oxbow.
I guess another thing that is being said a lot is, about the guides.
Mm-hmm.
I know I'm a fishing guide. I'm proud of it. And I really feel like, on my standpoint, we look to protect this resource a whole lot. But I know you guys have to look at us as well as taking out fish. But what's the department's standpoint as far as regulation of guides and things like that right now?
There's been a couple of bills written, but they've never come out of committee, is what I understand from talking with our Director Larry Pugh, Chief of Fisheries. Most of the push for regulations for guides is coming from the guides. And to some extent the anglers, but the regular crappie fishermen, but it's coming from the guides, simply to get a handle on how many is out there, where they're from, so on and so forth, and for our agency to get some kind of revenue from that, and know how many are out there and so on. There's obviously some enforcement challenges with that. Are you a guide, or are you just out there fishing with your buddy from Illinois?
Right.
Do you have to see money change hands, or so those are some challenges with regulating guides. I personally, I think that I think the guides will kind of make it kind of self-regulating, because they're going to know who's guiding and who's not,
right?
Even if maybe some of our folks don't.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I understand it. I just think that's something gets kind of brought up time to time, and I wanted to put it on the table right here today.
Well, again, our focus is on the resource.
Right.
And if
got over-harvested due to guiding, it would...
Well, I always talk about the phantom they, because when you talk to somebody, they'll always say, well, they are doing this, and they are doing this, and they are doing this, whoever they is.
Right.
It's never them.
Right.
It's always they.
Right.
But everybody is they. We're all they.
Correct.
If you're taking a crappie out of the lake, you're they.
Right.
And so our my thought process is, I look at the harvest that we get when we do our creel surveys, and is it reaching a level? I have kind of an action level that if it gets over a certain amount, that it's like little bells and whistles go off, and it's like maybe we need to think about. And we do know that we've done surveys with our anglers, and we do know that size limits are actually preferred to lower number limits, but sometimes you have to do both. But these 4 reservoirs that we've got here, they're the most highly regulated crappie fisheries in the country, period.
Yeah, no doubt about it.
But they're also like the place in the country to come and crappie fish.
Yeah, this is the bucket list.
Correct.
Right. And you know, it's kind of like trying to have your cake and eat it too. You know, we're generally these big crappie, like 3 pounds and up, or somewhere between 5 and 7 years old, minimum. White crappie. The black crappie, it takes them longer to get there. But you know, it's I hate to draw the analogy, but it's a whole lot like deer hunting. You know, other than with crappie, they grow throughout their lives, where with deer, they get to a certain point body-wise and kind of stop, but their antlers grow and they peak out at about that same 5 to 7 year old stage. So if you're wanting to produce like Boone and Crockett bucks, you've got to get that age on them. And so if you're trying to produce big crappie, you've got to get the age on them. And, you know, these fish are hitting that 12-inch mark at just past the white crappie, just past their 3rd birthday.
And that's all 4 of the core lakes through here?
Right. We have a little bit of variation lake to lake, but it's really close. I'm talking within about that much.
What'd you just say? When they get 12-inch? When they get 12-inch, what now?
They're just over 3 years old.
They're just over 3 years.
Yeah.
Wow. That's cool info.
And back in the late 1980s, we did a statewide look at age and growth of crappie. And we looked at Grenada, we looked at Columbus to represent the 10-tom. We looked at Ross Barnett, we looked at, not sure which lake we looked at in the Delta. We looked at one of the Delta oxbows.
I think Eagle.
No, I don't believe it was, but it was one of the Delta oxbows. Yeah. But anyway, the 4 lake average, you know, we use one representative from each of our, you know, main systems, was that once they reached, you know, you had this kind of slope, natural mortality up to about age 3, and then it just hit the bottom, and by age 5 there was almost nothing. And you know, when I started looking, when I started in '86, and we had like 3 years of drought in the late '80s. '88 was the worst. Our average crappie in our creel surveys in Sardis in fall of '88 was less than a half a pound.
Oh wow.
Oh wow. And of course we were getting complaints, and you know, we'd had. Do y'all remember the crappie-thon?
Yeah.
Well, we'd had the crappie-thon for like 2 or 3 straight years, which is that 2-month tagged, you know, you could catch tangle-free tom or whatever it was, and you might win $20,000. And, you know, that was putting extra pressure on the fish. And we looked at it, and it was like, you know, we were getting very few fish over age 2.5. And kind of like what Missouri was seeing. And we went with, we had, at that time, we had a 50 fish, no size limit, you know.
That's a lot of fish.
Yeah. Well, you know, and it's interesting because, and I was just reading an article in Fisherman on panfish management, bluegill and all, and it's kind of come full circle. The numbers per day limits in, say, the 1930s and 40s were lower than a lot of them are now, but they kind of increased during the 60s. It kind of got liberalized, and then they've kind of had come back down again. It's kind of funny that they, you know, everything old is new again, kind of.
Right, circle back.
Yeah, and yeah, it took us about, you know, 30, 40 years, but, you know, we had 2 liberalizations of statewide limits in the 60s. We went from 20 in the 50s, 20 per day, and then in the 60s, I think it was 64, we went to 30 per day, and then 69, we went to 50 per day. And I'm not sure if that was, you know, to be like equal with Arkansas are equal with Louisiana or what it was, or based on some of their tagging studies, where they weren't, with the technology that they had, they weren't really hurting the fish that much.
Right.
When you're out there with a sculling paddle and no depth finder and a concrete block on a rope for an anchor, it takes a lot of folks doing that to really hurt it. But once we got beyond that point, we're by the late 80s, after the drought years and all, we went with a 10-inch limit, which is what Missouri had gone with, and 25 fish number limit, which was half of, but based on what we were seeing.
You got some phone calls, didn't you?
Well, we went around and talked to businesses and anglers and stuff, and showed them our data. Here's what we got. Everybody knew at that point we needed to do something. So we didn't get much pushback. And we, those were instituted in 1989. And by the grace of God, we got a high water year in 89. Got them up in the bushes, kind of, got the growth rates up, got a good spawn. And we did a creel survey in 1990 on Sardis, and did a attitude survey, and pretty much 90% of the crappie fishermen they liked the new regulations, and wanted to keep them. And then through the 90s, we got kind of this Me Too movement, where Enid said, well, hey, can we have that? And the data showed, it'll work. And by I think it was by 94. Well, let me back up. We went to a 25 fish limit statewide in 91. Let me check, make sure I want to tell you right.
All like a man that brings his notes.
Yeah. And then the next year we had to go up to 30 because we got some complaints with the 25 statewide. We'd done public hearings throughout the state before we instituted the 25. We didn't get any pushback, and then after we did it, then we did. And you have to take into account the attitudes of your anglers, and is it going to hurt that much more to have 5 extra fish? No, we can live with that. So. But by 1994, we had a 10-inch, 30-fish limit on all 4 of the flood control reservoirs. They just kind of, each lake, actually, anglers from each lake requested it based on what they were seeing on the other lakes. And, that rocked on and rocked on. And we had some bad droughts in the mid-2000s. Same sort of thing happens. Fishing pressure, everybody talks about fishing pressure. It's based on hours per acre. Fishing effort
Wait a minute, say that again. What did you just say?
Fishing pressure is number of hours fished per acre. It's based on size.
There's your guy's formula right there.
So fishing effort is just hours, but pressure is hours per acre. So if the lake is half the size it was last year, and you have the same amount of effort on it, your fishing pressure has doubled, right?
Correct.
So when you have low water, whether it's on an oxbow or on a reservoir or whatever, your fishing pressure increases. And we were having the same kind of issue. In low water, again, your spawns are not as good as during high water. And the water that's there, even if you're producing, say, 500 crappie per acre young a year every year, there's less acres. So there's less total crappie on the low water year, even as well as being, less per acre as a poor spawn. So, it's kind of real kick in the teeth kind of thing.
Right.
And by 2006, we, remember we were talking about the trolling going up.
Yep.
we plotted out our catch rates for, we do one reservoir a year, so we do one every 4 years. And we looked at Sardis over 12 years, and our average size was going steadily down, but our average catch rate was going steadily up.
Mm-hmm.
And that's because folks were shifting over to trolling, and their catch rate was going up. But in that 12-year period prior to 2006, a 30-fish limit had declined 5 pounds based on the different average sizes.
Right.
So in order to fill your freezer, you actually had to go out and catch more fish.
Right.
Which is kind of self-defeating. So, we, that's started with Grenada, tried the 12-inch limit, and we had a like a 5 fish under 12-inch based on angler requests, because what if you deep hook a fish, yada. And we had problems with that short fish exemption. We had in 2006 we had a Grenada Lake Association where we had crappie anglers of various backgrounds, some tournaments, some not, some guides, and for business owners, bait shop owners, representatives of City of Grenada, and we had the Corps there explain their stuff, what constraints they had, and we can't change the rule curves, we just have to work around them. We can make recommendations. We've done some studies looking at that. That's part of that crappie tracking that you and I were talking about yesterday. That was part of a study to look at stuff that we, research a lot of times is just stuff that but nobody's put numbers to it.
Nobody's proved it.
Yeah, or written a paper on it. So, we all know that crappie move shallow in the spring. But when do they move? How shallow do they go? How long do they stay there? And that was some of the tracking stuff. And Ole Miss was doing that, and Mississippi State was doing some other work looking at history of the rule curves and plotting how many years they were at different levels, and what percentage of them, what percentage of years did they get up to, this point and then that point, and if you change the rule curves a little bit, how much would you improve the crappie spawn? Because we know it's mostly in the upper reservoir and in the backs of the coves and stuff. And so, make recommendations on that. And that's the kind of stuff that we've been involved with a lot of our research. It's always got a, practical management reason for doing it.
If you guys say continue seeing high harvest and the average weight drop down, and I know right now it's 15 a person over 12 inches, what would in your mind be a next step to manage that growth as far as protecting the resource?
Well,
would it be move them up, length, or would it be cutting down the harvest?
It could be both. We'll just have to see what happens, and you also have to do what's socially acceptable.
Socially acceptable.
Well, like I said, when we did do surveys, we find that size limits are with crappie that we looked at this like 15, 20 years ago, but size limits were more acceptable than reduced bag limits. But here in the last few years, I think, even though, 15, 12-inch crappie weighed more than 30, 10-inch crappie as far as the meat you put in the freezer, you know, people get that in their head that 30 fish is more than 15 fish.
Right.
Yeah.
So you have to try and I guess in a way I'm kind of a salesman for less, you know, and able to spread that harvest out among our you know, various user groups.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a challenge.
Mm-hmm. I can imagine.
Because you have different user groups pulling you in different directions. And you have to do what's best for the resource sometimes and not try to listen to any special interests and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
You talk about a lot of surveys. How does one turn in their survey from a week-long fishing trip or everyday use? Is there a platform y'all have on website, or is there an app for that where an individual can, if they're really if they're tuning in and listening here, probably all of them will probably say, hey, I want to do that.
Well, we don't have, like, there's been some states that have had, you know, like angler diaries.
Yeah.
And that provides some limited information, but it does not.
It don't help y'all?
Well, it helps, but it doesn't give you a unbiased picture. Because most people that would do that are
serious.
Yeah, they're serious. They fish a lot. They're usually a better than average angler, and you may get data that looks really good, but they may be the only guy on the
6 other boats didn't catch anything.
Right, and our data has shown
but
that.
Wouldn't that be better?
Well, let me just.
All right, I'm way ahead. Okay.
That's
My
okay.
mind's swirling.
Our creel data has shown that even on the very best lakes, on the very best days, that somewhere between 20 and 30% of the folks that go out there still come back with a 0.
There you go.
So, and the old saying about 10% of the fishermen catch 90% of the fish is fairly accurate. When we were looking at a 15-inch or 15-fish limit, we looked at how many, completed trips and how many fish did everybody catch. And over, let's see, it was Arcabutla, Enid, and Grenada, those 3 lakes that we looked at one spring, only 6% of the folks caught more than 15 fish.
Wow.
During the spring, peak of the spawn.
That's a crazy number right there.
Yeah, and that was when we had the 30 fish limit. And, yes, some days the crappie gods shine upon you and you load the boat.
Right.
But, it's kind of the human brain. You think of the good times and try and forget the bad ones, otherwise you go crazy.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I remember a fishing trip, a buddy and I, we probably caught 70 bass in about 2 hours, but, that's not the norm.
Mm-hmm.
We all have times like that we remember fondly and talk about for years.
Show pictures of?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. But we need to get try our best to get an unbiased average.
Mm-hmm.
And that angler diary, that's maybe the expert angler, the very interested person, it may be good data, particularly in, say, size range of fish or something like that. But it may not represent the average. In fact, it almost certainly is not going to represent the average.
That's a view I didn't even think of.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I would think totally opposite of that, but
it makes perfect sense.
That's why it's your job and not mine.
Well, we have to kind of manage for the average and see if we can bring that up maybe or at least maintain it. Say the average size or the average catch rate or something like that. So we, that's the kind of numbers we're looking at.
Real quick, so what's your process of surveying? Y'all just like mount up at the boat ramp as anglers come in? That's where you get your data.
We
'Cause
actually
we had that done to us on Eagle.
okay. Some of our biologists do what's called a completed trip survey, and we do actually a roving survey where we're on the water. We talk to you on the water. What we're doing is we're counting anglers in a certain area of the lake. We have each lake split into different areas, and we look at 3 different time periods during the day, and we know, say we're going out in section 3 a.m., and we'll count all the anglers and interview them, and then we'll do
Like verbally.
Yeah.
Verbally on the water. Have you ever had that done, Brad? Okay.
Really. I'm
No.
surprised we hadn't run into you.
Well, I'm fished mainly out of Washington and Ross Barnett. So.
Okay, well then that's why we haven't seen you.
Right.
But if you were on Grenade or any of the others to
Mhm.
any extent, you'll probably run into us.
Right.
But we ask what time did you start fishing? Where are you from? What are you fishing for? And then we'll weigh your fish, keeping the different species separate, and how many short fish did you let go if you're crappie fishing? Did you catch anything else? Say
Right.
it was catfish or whatever. Did you throw anything else back? And then we ask some really pointed questions like, well, how much you figure you spent today on your
Mhm.
trip, and we have been able to use those figures. We've seen some huge economic increases up here in terms of the money spent on these fisheries.
How much is crappie fishing worth to the state of Mississippi?
Oh, that's a good question.
I don't know.
Estimate. Guesstimate.
I really am not going to throw a number out there because I just don't know, and I don't want to throw something.
I know.
Well, I mean, you look at, say, that 3-day tournament that was just on Sardis. They had to stay somewhere, they had to eat somewhere, they spent
Right.
gas, they spent, bought bait. All of them are,
And license.
yeah, and license. And all of them are running rigs that, probably boat and vehicle and equipment is, over 100,000 that's bought somewhere. Maybe not here, but some of it, certainly a lot of the residents bought here. So, you're talking about and not everybody's running that kind of rig,
Right,
but
of course.
and spending that kind of money. But, that goes into it, into our calculations, and I don't have it in front of me, but, we have a mission statement, and part of that is both, the resource and the economic benefit, to the state, which you got to keep that in mind. You can't, like in 88, when we were talking to folks about, putting that first limit on Sardis, their main concern was people will all leave and we won't make any money. They will not come to Sardis because the stricter limits, and we will go out of business. And that's a valid concern. I understand that concern. If I were running a bait shop, I would be, feeling the same way. What we have seen over the years is at no time have we ever seen fishing effort go down after the imposition of stricter regulations. In fact, most times it goes up. Now, we have worked with, again, Dr. Moran at Mississippi State, and we've looked at some other things. Water levels have a big effect on
Of
fishing
course, yeah.
effort. If it's really low or it's really high, our effort goes down. It's highest when it's sort of normal, which makes sense. And fuel prices. Gas is $4 a gallon. The lake's empty.
Right.
Back in, what was it, 2008 or whenever it was, our effort just tanked. and those factors drive a lot more than regulations. And it's kind of a build it and they will come kind of thing. When we got the Me Too with the size limits on Sardis and then the other reservoirs jumped on, when we got the 12-inch limit on Grenada, the other reservoirs jumped on. They wanted, hey, we see what's happening. Mm-hmm. We want some of that. Mm-hmm. So, we get some folks that don't want it. But you're always going to have a certain percentage that want to just keep anything that
right
got eyeballs.
Right.
About a mile from Big Muddy River, a place I'll always remember. Cabin on the lake and a fishing pole. Forever here I'll rest my soul. I can feel